I will not be pushed, filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. My life is my own.
What an incredibly stupid question.
Hey, what's up everybody? Good afternoon, it's Carpo here. Once again, I have a few things to talk about, and let's just get right into it. I wanted to talk about history and the future as well. So this is a little bit of, well, let me think. I wouldn't say it's science versus science and speculation, because when you look at history, it's pretty much the history narrative is what people want you to believe. And the question has always been, who wants you to believe a certain version of history and why? And without getting too involved in that, I'd like to talk a little bit about human history and what I think about our ancestors, the Egyptians, and back to the Sumerians and before that. And this will be a little speculation on my part, of course, but I was going to make this video several days ago, and I have all these notes and ideas in my head, but no interest in making really videos. So I'm forcing myself to make one right now, and I was going to do it outside in the nice garden, and then there were sirens and noise going on, and before it frustrated me, I thought, okay, this is a condition of the modern society, you know. There has always been noise and chaos, but there has been a lot going on lately, and it's hard for me not to, I'd rather step back and say, okay, is it really as bad as it seems like it is? And let me make sure that my camera actually has enough space on here. I think it should. Sometimes I wonder if it's going to quit in the middle of a video. But anyhow, here I am on YouTube talking about the false history narrative. And why am I talking about history in general? Because I'm fascinated with especially ancient technology. The pyramids, places like Puma Punku, all the Peruvian architecture, and I've in years past been fascinated by the well, the pyramids are just one small part of a larger picture, but there are still people who believe that the pyramids were actually tombs because there was a sarcophagus in there. The question was always, why weren't there any hieroglyphs or reliefs or carvings or inscriptions within there? And not only that, but recently there was nanotechnology that was created based on the void spaces within the pyramid itself. In other words, the shafts seem to create some sort of an energetic effect that in the past may not be too far off to think that they may have had some use. Now before you think, oh, that's all speculation, it was just built by Egyptians for a tomb, that's still a possibility. I don't know. But the question is always, what do people have to gain over lying about history? Now there's a whole conspiracy community right now oriented around, and always has been, but especially today, oriented around this idea that we've been fed lies. Often it's true. Sometimes people say, well, it's the Christians that are feeding lies, and a lot of the times the conspiracy groups are actually Christians themselves who believe that science is perpetuating the lies. So instead of trying to argue one point or the other, let's bridge the gap and see what really is it that we want to believe about our history. Why do people want us to believe certain histories? And it's not always for nefarious purposes, and that's what I'm getting at. Often we make up a history because it suits our fancy and we can become famous off of it. In the 1800s, there were several dinosaur skeletons that were assembled completely incorrectly. They would use random bones just to make it work, and there was a lot of guesswork involved in it. Because of that kind of fraud that they had in the beginning, that's still used against, dinosaurs, paleontologists, and people who study the bones. And there are still people who deny dinosaurs existed. They will say, well, there's no actual bones, they're just fossils, and, others will say, well, God put it here to test our faith. Others say, no, man rode on dinosaurs, like the Ark Encounter or the Ark Experience from Ken Ham. Now, if you're not aware of that, go ahead and look it up. They built a reproduction, supposedly, of Noah's Ark, and it's complete with people and dinosaurs on the Ark. Partially paid for by taxpayer dollars, so it became a major issue. I think it's in Kentucky. But anyhow, back to the main point here before I get too far off. There are a lot of lies in history, but it doesn't mean we can make our own history up. but it also doesn't mean that we can't contribute at least some thoughts as to what we believe. A good example would be what they call the, I can't remember what it's called. There's a particular ring, a series of natural rings, formations out in the Sahara Desert, which there's a theory that it was Atlantis, because it measures up and it seems to fit Plato's account of Atlantis. But honestly, Plato, he was telling a story that was passed down through word of mouth. I mean, whether or not the story is accurate and there was an Atlantis, that area doesn't seem to fit into the actual story, because there's a whole bunch of notes I wrote down. I'm not going to get into it. The Strait of Gibraltar and all these different ideas of where it could have been. Here's the thing. During the last ice age, apparently the oceans were much, much lower, and so therefore the shorelines in many areas were several miles out further than they are now. So when people say, well, our ancient history was buried and we may have had high technology, there are a lot of people who do not want to believe that in the scientific community. Folks who say, no, there's not possible because we've only found stone tools here and metal tools at this time, there's no way that the people in the past could have had this technology. You could apply that same principle to the Antikythera mechanism, which was found off of the coast, I think near Spain or something, that was dated to be over 1,000 years old. No, sorry, I think it was over 2,000 years old, and it was complete with, once they were able to actually analyze it and see what it was a series of many, many gears which showed the sun, the planets, the rotation of the moon around, all the different eclipses. Everything could be predicted with this little wind-up thing. It was like Swiss precision, like a watch. And it just throws people for a loop when these things are found. And they think, well, it's what you might call it an out-of-place artifact. They call them UPAs. But here's the thing. Nobody's an expert on the true history of mankind. And it's my belief that a lot of it has been covered up by the oceans themselves. And this is, of course, proving itself to be true. We found several different shipwrecks off the coasts, but we've also found several different cities. There have been places like in, I believe, the Black Sea, or areas where it's well preserved, where they found, some of the most ancient ships, and they keep finding things that, wow, we didn't realize that people had gotten this far. Or how did we find tobacco or cannabis with this group of people, or with these mummies when it didn't grow there at the time? Trade is the most likely answer. It's Occam's razor. If you're finding technology, high technology, it's hard to deny that there was something going on. But after the last ice age, when the oceans rose, it wasn't just about the ocean levels rising themselves. The Sahara itself used to be jungle, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around 10,000 years ago, they believed that that whole northern African area was actually green, with water flowing through it, which isn't too surprising. Land masses rise and fall, and we humans, with our modern technology and our, inscriptions, we've only been documenting things for, a couple thousand years, and before that it was just ideas that were passed down and stories about the great flood myths, which a flood myth could just as easily be of vastly rising oceans over a short period of time, which could be caused by volcanic activity, could be caused by an impact. And there was recently a Greenland crater which was found that coincides perfectly with around 12,000 years ago, right around the time when there was a major warming after the last ice age. It could have been part of it, it could have triggered it. And there's a lot of argument over how much humans are changing the climate. I don't get into that because I come to the conclusion that these natural cycles were definitely affecting, but these things are much bit larger than we could ever fathom. We don't have enough of an actual history of the Earth, but that's changing because we're able to take things. Core samples are amazing. The way that we can take a core sample and identify gas pockets and different layers and, use a variety of different, tests and chromatography to figure out, what existed when, what plants, what types of radioactive isotopes, right? So these core samples have shown us, there's a whole video I was going to do on the potential for a quake here where I live, the big one. Not in California, but in the Pacific Northwest. And there is a group of people who have been going around for about 10 years and doing various core samples from all the way up the coast and finding that, yes, we have these regular huge tsunamis from major 9-point earthquakes about every 300 years. We can identify this through research, and the last 20 years has shown us so much more about not just recent archaeology and history, but soil samples, stone, rock core samples from the bottom of the ocean, from the ice caps, and it's pretty fascinating to me. The question is, did we ever have a high technology? Well, when you look at the way the pyramids were built, for one, they could have been built, sure, they could have been built by many people and moved by these various methods. But why? Why so perfect? And, it's pretty amazing. To me, it's like it's left as a message for future generations. But that's not even the one that really gets me. It's, what is it, Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe was a place that was dug up and not really realized until recently how old it really was. And it could be thousands of years older than we thought. People had the technology to carve stone like that. These pillars, everything, it seemed to be like a prayer area because there were no real artifacts found, just these giant stone carvings and pillars. But it was buried on purpose. And sometimes I wondered, maybe it was buried naturally, by, sand over time. But no, according to the fill dirt that was found in there, it contained items, bones, whatnot, that showed that it was purposefully hidden and filled in. Nobody knows why, but there's an interesting thing that I learned, which is, we talk about, for example, years ago, when I was a kid, we didn't know that we were partially, Denisovans, Neanderthal, that we all had a little bit of Neanderthal genes in us. And especially the taller white people, like myself, apparently have more, and Asians have less. But then I found out there was another species found recently, like the last 10 years, Denisovan, which was a third human species, which also... So anyhow, I got interrupted there, so I'm going to try to piece this together as best I can. I was talking about Neanderthal and how we had Neanderthal DNA, and we also found out about this species called Denisovans. I think it was in like 2011. And from a small finger bone found in a cave, and you have to trust the experts to some extent if you're going to believe history, but it's really hard for some people to understand how a person can find a small bone or a fragment and track down the actual genetic history of this, being. But here's what I'm getting at. These Denisovans, it turns out, Asians have a lot more Denisovan DNA within them, which may explain some of the differences between humans, black, white, Asian, It's interesting because there might be more to it than just people moving to a land, right? And over a period of time, losing their melanin or keeping their melanin. In other words, there may be more human-like, I guess what would it be, the Homo genus, if that's right, that we're not aware of. But I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of people who believe that DNA from aliens is seeded with humans 100,000 years ago, and here we are. As absurd as that sounds, it's really interesting when you look at not any history we have, but where humans are headed. And the idea that if humans got to another planet and we found a species with our genetic knowledge, especially 20 years from now, using a variety of different technologies, is it so hard to think that we actually would try to seed or change a species on another planet as kind of a, either a test or for a variety of reasons? Maybe even to grow food. It's not like only a few movies have been made about that, where the planet Earth is seeded so humans can grow out a population and then be harvested. It sounds like a ridiculous scenario, but actually in the big picture, it's really not that ridiculous. But anyhow, it's unlikely, and I don't believe that. But I do think that with the amount of history we have of this planet, there very well may have been an intellectually superior species. And in other words, just because there were Stone Age humans does not mean at the time there wasn't an advanced civilization. You see what I'm saying? Because even today, let's say in 10 million years, people are digging out fossils from today, and they happen to be digging where South African tribes or African tribes lived, or South American tribes that still live in the Amazon, and maybe they happen to dig up some of those. They'd be more likely to come across a city, of course, but most of these things would just completely decay. The chances of finding, these areas where there was enough protection to keep the fossilize the bones is difficult. So who knows what the future may bring? And there are a lot of folks who think that, of course, we're hiding and obscuring a history. That there's giants that have been found, and I know tall humans have been found, and I know pygmy tribes have been found, and that's fascinating. But as far as like 30-foot, 40-foot humans, I think that's pretty preposterous. But it's not that it's impossible; it's just not likely, in my opinion. But if we do find it, that would completely change a lot of things, and a lot of the paradigms are breaking, not just in our history, but our theories of the universe. But one thing about the Denisovan DNA I wanted to mention, they believe that it's that DNA, that component of the DNA, which helps Tibetans survive so well and thrive at high altitudes. So that may be their ancestor that helped to give them that benefit. That's an important trait. But any humans can evolve genetic traits over time to live within their environment, and that's what's fascinating about humans. We adapt to a lot of different things, and it makes you wonder how smart some of our ancestors may have been. I mean, when a lot of folks when I was mentioning Atlantis earlier, the thing that's interesting to me is that I don't really believe that anyone's found Atlantis. But I'm not quite sure if it even really existed, and if it did, whether or not it existed in the description that was given of it, which I've looked at, several times. But my thought is this: it probably existed, if at all, say 10, 12,000 years ago, before the ice age, either before that last ice age or after the last ice age, and before the waters rose to the point where it was, inundated. But if you look in the Persian Gulf, the most chaotic, area right now in the Middle East there, but that whole area was much, much lower. It had small waterways through it. And it was considered the most fertile land at the time. Like I said, they say about 8 to 10,000 years ago, that would have been some of the most fertile land on the planet. And in my opinion, that is the Fertile Crescent. They like to say, of course, it's between the Tigris and Euphrates, but lands have changed over time. The original cradle of civilization was likely right now what is filled with water. And this has been proven in the last couple decades because they're digging up these... as the water starts to, recede in certain places, they found up to 60 different little settlements, and they expect to find more. And the point being that if there was an advanced civilization that long ago, they probably would have lost a lot of, I should say their shorelines would have gradually risen and inundated their homes, and there would be really very little left to find except for monoliths and stone buildings, which we have found under the ocean, but they're harder to identify. I guess the thing is, it's fascinating to me, why is it that people are so, mainstream archaeology and science is so just resistant to admitting there may be more to this. There's even, I think the guy's name was Zahid Hawass. He was like the main Egyptologist for years, and he's the one you'd always see on documentaries who was dismissing anyone else's theories except his own. No, this is the way it is, this is the history. And he's a perfect example, a perfect metaphor, kind of the figurehead for how many different groups, scientific or even religious groups, may want to protect their version of history, which goes back to the beginning of why would anyone hide ancient history? And my thought is that it's not about political motive, and it's not about monetary incentive, like a lot of lies are. It would be about protecting our beliefs, because we're fearful to admit that there may be a history we can't understand. And I spent years fascinated with these megalithic structures and came to the conclusion that regardless of how they did them, the people were master craftsmen. They cannot be repeated today. If they could, they would be. And humans today, believe me, a lot of folks say, well, people don't want to take the time to carve stones that big, bullshit. If there are some billionaires out there who want to be remembered, and honestly, a monolithic structure like that is probably the ultimate in, showing your, I guess, leaving something for the future that really can't be destroyed. I mean, the pyramids have been there for a long time. And I can't imagine how beautiful they looked when they had the casing stones still on them. And there are theories that the casing stones were carted away to be used in villages for other buildings. And partially that's been shown to be true, but the four corners were blown off, and there's a theory that, there was an energy-related chaotic, history that came from, who knows, the electric universe theory is, I don't go for it 100%, but there are some theories there as far as electromagnetism and kind of static, I guess, between planetary bodies. We have a lot to learn about where we come from. Hell, I just read an article that said we found a star that was 14.8 billion years old. For those unaware, the universe is only said to be 13.7 billion years old. So in other words, we just found a star that's only 200 light years away, which is right off the edge of the Milky Way galaxy, that by our calculations has to be over 1 billion years older than the universe itself. And so what that does is it rewrites the history. They're trying to cross their margins of error by saying, well, it might not be as old as we think, and then the universe might be a little older than we think, and making it fit, and it will barely fit, but it's still one of those things where nobody wants to change the laws of relativity. Nobody wants to change history. Nobody wants to change what other people before us have presented. But we can't completely negate everything we've learned in the past. But we can let go of some of the inconsistencies, let's say. Einstein's equations, for example, don't work with, the quantum realm. And if we, go back to the Big Bang, inflation, all these different ideas about where we come from, it becomes really absurd. The ideas of what humans think they can actually know. But that's for another story altogether. This one's getting long. I'd like to discuss this kind of elusive history we have, the idea that we know more than we do, and the arrogance with which people present their truths. And I'm not just talking about snooty scientists, in their little meetings. I'm talking about snooty YouTubers who just blab any bullshit that they hear on online and say, this is the truth, this is the real history. Look at what ancient aliens did. And that was when the History Channel was actually good at one time, guys. Seriously. When I was younger, before internet days, before the internet was loaded with enough cool stuff to keep you distracted, I loved watching Ancient Aliens and the History Channel, and then it got into Ancient Aliens, and it was easy to bite on that and to be like, wow, that's amazing, maybe that's true. Holy shit, were these mountaintops really cleared for landing strips for ships? Whoa, that's interesting. And you learn now those are like mesas, there's certain types of mountains. No, there was no face on the Mars, you can look at the lighting. And the minute you start to doubt this wild history that's presented, people start saying, oh, you've just believed the masses. You've just bought into the mainstream lies. I would like to bridge that gap and say, sometimes people do buy into the mainstream. For me, I went down the rabbit hole as deep as it goes, and then it comes back out at the surface if you're smart. If you keep digging, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to suffocate, right? If you want to use the rabbit hole as an analogy, if you dig a rabbit hole, you can only stay down there so long. You got to come out to breathe. But if you keep digging straight down, you'll suffocate. If you go, if you do it right, you'll have two entrances. You come on up on the other side and you realize, whoa, you come up for air, you see the beautiful world around you and realize, I don't want to live down there. Because the rabbit hole really is where they go to be protected. It's a place of fear and protection. So it is the perfect metaphor for the conspiracy realm, because we tend to hide behind the idea that we cannot believe the experts. They must all be lying. They must all be in on some giant conspiracy to convince us the earth is a globe, or whatever the bullshit story may be. But a lot of people haven't just bought the narrative. A lot of us have actually looked at all sides and said, oh my god, okay, sometimes Occam's razor, sometimes the mainstream truth is mainstream for a reason. Because if you really believe that humans are a collective, and that our wit, you know, is at least somewhat able to distinguish truth from bullshit, well, I do to an extent, but today it's getting harder to know for sure. But I guess that's all I've got to say on that. And thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hope you all have a wonderful day. And I hope you enjoy your version of history, whatever it might be. You know, I just talked about some interesting ancient stuff, but there's modern history that has some serious implications, man. I mean, Holocaust deniers, for one, you know. How about people who deny every shooting that happens? Every single video that happens that somebody says, nope, false flag, this is all a setup to take our guns. And you know, these people are just so full of shit. I've been hearing this for 20 years, that every shooting they're going to take our guns. Yet every year, statistically, I look at the numbers, more shootings, more guns. We love guns here. I'm not making this political. I'm just saying what's pushed on us. And anyhow, probably shouldn't have even brought that up at this point in time. I had a point that I was going to get at, but I'll talk to y'all later. Have a wonderful day. Take care of yourself, take care of others. Things really do happen in this world. There are real events, and it's important that we come together and understand that. I think. Let me know what you think. Take care.
Raindrops floating down the river, yay, close your eyes, it's okay, mushroom clouds, hooray, drift, drift, fade away.
Thanks for coming to Carbo's channel, yo.